I talked a lot yesterday about the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act being signed into, it's going to be signed into law shortly, made it through the House and the Senate after 120 years. But I've been getting a lot of heat on social media saying, who cares? It's symbolic. It took 120 years, doesn't really matter. And I wanted to get y'all perspective on that. There are some people, I think it's a win, even though it took 120 years. I think it's a win for the Biden-Harris administration. But there are some folks I know who just aren't happy, and I'd like to know what you think about this. Amisha, you go first.
Absolutely. And I don't want to give credence to the people who say it doesn't matter, but I do think that we have to understand the plight that Black America is in right now. And the fact that symbolism politics is something that, quite frankly, a lot of people who look like us are frustrated with. After 200 attempts plus to get this, to get some form of anti-lynching legislation passed at the federal level, this is still a victory. I think that we can talk about this being a victory. We can talk about all of the people who have, who we've lost as it relates to the brutality that African Americans have faced in this country for so long, and look towards this promise that happens to come from this, without also negating the fact that Black people across this country are suffering with inflationary costs, with housing issues, with economic issues related to job loss, or even finding jobs that provide them with a living wage and benefits. All of those things are very much real, and this doesn't take away from any of that. But we can celebrate a win and also push our government to be more equitable towards Black people at the same time. And I think that that's what we have to focus on. It can't be that this doesn't matter, because Lord knows many people fought and died for this to matter. And that we've had civil rights leaders, civil rights organizations, civil rights adjacent folks, those who are in the communities every single day who have fought for this tirelessly. This has been a generational push. And just what was it, a month and a half ago, we saw the Emmett Till special that was shown, that many people tuned in and watched and learned more about that, not only the lead up to that crisis moment in American history, but also what Mamie Till Mobley went through herself to get the world to pay attention. I think that with all of that being said, we cannot negate the importance of the anti-lynching bill that has been turned into law. And it's one of few things that we've seen bipartisan support on. And just a few months ago when it came up, we didn't even have that. Remember the stalwart and Senator Rand Paul, who did not want to see it happen then. I think that we have to be very strategic about how we talk about these things, but also fully recognize where we're coming from and all of the work we have yet to do.
Keith?
Yeah, I agree with what Amisha said. And I think two things can be true at the same time. It can be true that this is a somewhat symbolic step, but also it can be true that it's a very important, significant, substantive step at the same time. And I think we have to fight against the tendency to be cynical about everything that happens, and acknowledge when some things good do happen. For whatever reason, I'm not going to give credit to Rand Paul for his last minute adjustment, considering he was running for a Senate re-election against Charles Booker, who's an African American, and this kind of suits him certainly politically at this moment to suddenly come out in favor of this legislation that he's been opposed to. But the reality is that I've been one of the most critical people I can think of in the Democratic Party against the Biden administration for the failure to address issues of Black concern. And three of the issues I've been focusing on for the past year and a half have been the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act. This is one of those three. And I think it's an accomplishment for the Biden administration. It may not be on the front burner for a lot of people, but for a lot of people who have fought for these issues for decades, this is history. I wrote about this in my book, Race Against Time. Black people have been fighting for anti-lynching laws. It actually goes back to the 1890s. Now, people say it started in 1900. It actually goes back to the 1890s. And the Democratic Party in the early 1900s did nothing at all, obviously, but the Republican Party, which was a party of the black people in the early 1900s, failed to pass the Anti-Lynching Act, and that was one of the reasons why they lost support. One of the reasons why Black people abandoned the Republican Party in the 1930s was because they failed to pass anti-lynching legislation. So here we are now getting this. So I would say this, in spite of all my criticism of the Biden administration, if I were the Biden administration, I would be pointing to 5 or 6 things that they've done and point to other things that they would like to do. I would focus on the fact that they passed this Anti-Lynching Act, which is a big deal. I would focus on the fact they nominated Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court, which is a big deal, even though some people say it's symbolic. This is somebody who will have a lifetime appointment, will have an impact on our legislature and our laws for decades. I would focus on the fact that we have funding for HBCUs.
Historic funding.
Historic funding for HBCUs. I would focus on the relief for Black farmers, even though white farmers have been fighting against it. And then when you add all that into the somewhat things that are symbolic, okay, nobody wanted the Juneteenth holiday, but they signed a Juneteenth holiday. People weren't excited about having a Black vice president in the sense that it wasn't something people wanted, but it's something that happened. So Biden has appointed a Black woman for president, a Black woman vice president, a Black Supreme Court justice, given historic funding to HBCUs, giving funding directly to Black colleges. At the same time, he's about to sign the Anti-Lynching Act that people have been fighting for 120 years. That's not a horrible record. It's not the two most important things that a lot of younger Black people have been fighting for in terms of police.
For the first 14 months, no, it's not. For the first 14 months, it's not horrible.
I mean, if they can focus on that and talk about the fact that and make an effort to focus on the other two things that are really out there, the policing and the voting, I think that's not a record to be ashamed of. And I say this as somebody, as I said before, who has been very critical of the administration and will continue to be critical of the administration because I don't think they've done enough. But I don't think they should be ashamed necessarily. I think it's just disappointing they haven't focused on some of the issues that I care about as well.
And listen, I also think they have to hammer in the fact that he's appointed more Black judges in the first 14 months than any other president in history. He's the first president in his first year or so appointing less white judges. This is the first time ever. He's gone
and
down.
It's not just talking about the number, Clay. It's also talking about the meaningful impact there. I think that for Democrats, both Black and white, judges have long not been considered, top billing when it comes to legislative priorities, where Republicans have always prioritized them.
Always.
For Black people specifically, because of the criminal justice efforts that are needed within our Black community, we have to talk about this not in terms of sheer number, because it's not just representation, it's what that representation will actually mean. So what will that feel like for Black people? And I think that, those are messaging points that this administration just has not come up with.
And I have to say that every person who calls him or herself or themselves a progressive, who is not focused on or not concerned about or pretends like it doesn't matter what happens with the appointments of the courts, is an idiot. Every single one of them is.
You can curse.
Every single one of them is an idiot. I was telling people back in 2016, just look at the Supreme Court. If whatever else you think about Hillary Clinton, look at the Supreme Court. We had a chance to have a liberal majority in the Supreme Court for the first time since the 1970s. And people said, oh, it's no big deal. So now we have a 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court that can strike down all those laws that you think are a big deal, because people were idiots and didn't pay attention to what was really important. So stop being idiots. This is important. Who gets appointed to the Supreme Court and the federal courts is extremely important. And if you don't think that, you're about to see your rights be taken away because of the fact that we didn't pay attention to that for the past few decades.
Absolutely. One more. So I just wanted this. I've seen y'all on social media. I get it, and I knew y'all would add some brilliant nuance to it. One other thing I want to get to, then we'll go to the topics of the day, is this "Don't Say Gay" bill. A lot of folks are talking about it now. I broke it down yesterday that it deputizes parents, and I feel like when parents are deputized, that will impact Black and brown parents the most. But nonetheless, y'all, I have still seen people on social media, Black folks on social media, saying that, well, why would a kid be learning about sexuality in kindergarten? And I'm like, that's not happening. It's the same layout as critical race theory. But I've seen this, and I think what saddens me is that they're literally banking on your prejudices. They're banking on you being a bigot for you to fall for it, for you to think this will somehow have an impact on Black and brown children. But I just wanted y'all to sign off on that. Go ahead, Amisha.
No, you're absolutely right. And quite frankly, they're winning that argument. Sadly, because we do have a lot of people who quite frankly will fall on the religious sword when it comes to being anti-LGBT or pushing against LGBT rhetoric, even though, as you've pointed out, in our kindergarten system, in our K-12 system, there is no curriculum that is based on LGBT, as science or any of the theories around sexual orientation at all. But what we see in Florida is a push against things that they would like to outlaw in terms of social behavior, as well as trying to, in many cases, and I have heard it, purify the system. And it's very frustrating because it leads to and it supports things like the theories of change associated with these gender therapies and those camps that we all know are problematic in various senses. But the issue here is that it also hurts students and their families. I can't imagine what it feels like. And I think I've talked on this show about it before. One of my really close friends in grade school ended up killing himself because his community would not accept him. Our school would not accept him. He reported bullying on a regular basis. He would literally get beat up every single day and nobody cared. And they would make fun of him and laugh at him. And he threw his body in front of an oncoming train. That was a child. He did not deserve any of that. And I was in Florida at the time. So I'm like, the institution itself of schools that allows for the type of brutality that I see, have witnessed myself personally, but I've also worked in school systems and have witnessed it on that level as well. What we need is more protections for our LGBTQIA individuals, specifically those that are youth, because if we don't protect them, who else will? With that being said, basically deputizing parents, teachers, and other individuals who may not accept an LGBTQIA individual is not helpful to our society. And I think that the preying on Black people that's happening right now and the picking off of Black people is this fear that if it's talked about in our schools or if there are gays in our schools, then all of a sudden it's almost like it's in the water. Everybody who's close to them will somehow become gay. That's a theory that has been going on in our community for quite some time. Just push it to the side, act like it's not really happening, and then all of a sudden it'll go away. Or if you penalize it, then we don't have to worry about it. And I think that it's also, pushed on social media. We see even so from the celebrity focus, rappers who are very misogynistic, who are very anti-gay, anti-LGBT, who will say things that are quite frankly very offensive to the community, and they get all types of retweets and support. I think that within the Black community, we've seen such a dissidence against gays, lesbians, trans people for so long that this type of legislation, quite honestly, many people are cheering on. And it's really sad to see because it's not only a violation of civil and human rights, it's also pushing people into a further mental health crisis. And we know that mental health issues, suicide and other issues are higher amongst LGBT youth than they are any other demographic. We have to be very, very honest when we have these conversations, but we also have to look inward to our own community and the people in our community who perpetuate anti-LGBT hate every single day.
Keith?
Again, I agree with everything Amish has said. And
don't we all?
I went to high school in Florida, and I was part of this group of students that were indoctrinated in a course that we had to take called Comparative Political Studies, where we had CPS. We had to look at the evils of communism compared to capitalism. And Florida has a long history of student indoctrination of their public schools. And it's not the only state, of course, that does this. The tragedy is twofold, in my opinion. One, because the Republican Party has nothing else to offer to the voters in the country other than hate and fear and demagoguery. They don't have solutions for unemployment or for joblessness or people who aren't getting paid enough or for wages. They don't have a solution for health care or the fact that millions of Americans don't have it or can't afford insurance. They don't have any solutions for the actual quality of the public schools or the access to the public schools or the dissolution of schools in some communities or the breakup of schools in Black communities. They don't have a solution for the student loan debt problem. They don't have a solution for the housing crisis in our country, the affordable housing problem, for the homelessness problem in our country. They don't have a solution for climate change or criminal justice reform. So all they got is this fear and demagoguery and hatred. And look at
identity politics, Keith. Identity politics, which they claim they hate.
This is exactly what it is. It's white identity politics, which is targeted at getting a fear directed at Muslims and Black people, at LGBTQ people and others, which is the second issue, which is so disturbing, is that the same people who are attacking LGBTQIA people are attacking Black people. The same people who are attacking Black people who are attacking Muslims, who are attacking all these, they're all interconnected. And we do ourselves a disservice as African Americans or people of color if we think that this doesn't affect us. The reason why Ron DeSantis, the Republican governor of Florida, is supporting this legislation is the same reason why he's supporting the legislation attacking critical race theory, because they want to get white conservative voters riled up against all those others, all those people who don't represent them. And what saddens me, Clay, is that I'm old enough to remember when this happened before. I remember back in the late 1970s when Anita Bryant, down in Florida in the Sunshine State, she was the orange juice queen back in the day. She used to be on the TV commercials doing the orange juice commercials. When Anita Bryant and Jerry Falwell, the so-called moral majority, led an effort to target Black people, to target LGBTQ people, to target women. It was a response to the civil rights movement of the 1960s, to the feminist movement of the 60s and 70s, to the LGBTQIA movement of the 60s and 70s, and the sense of this changing society. They wanted to put America back into the 1950s, Leave It to Beaver, Ozzie and Harriet package that never existed. And they're trying to do the same thing again. This is not just a war against gay students. This is a war against modernity. It's a war against modern society. It's a war to change the evolution that's taking place, to stop this progress of having a Black president, a Black vice president, of marriage equality and gay rights and women's rights and all these other groups of people who they don't want to be included. And they're all being targeted right now.
And Keith's 100% right. They're trying to go back to what they consider the good old days where, and we still have a long way to go with equity, but they consider that we have made some movements. The fact that we ever got a Black president is still, broiled in the back of in the front of their minds, actually, and trying to stop that from ever even being a consequence ever again. In addition to watching, more women be in the workforce, more women get educated today than we've ever had historically. In addition to watching gay marriage become the law of the land. In addition to seeing literally these groups of people that they've worked so hard to not fully be a part of this democracy actually have even the smallest crumb at the table is really destroying who they are innately. And I think that we're going to see more and more laws in state legislatures across the country pass just because they have to feel a semblance of that great white personhood that they felt in the past that they think is going away very swiftly.
Well, that's why I wanted y'all to sound off on that, because one of the things that I try and do on these airwaves, Urban View, we have a diverse audience. It is a predominantly Black audience, but you can still be predominantly Black and be diverse, obviously, is that I want to make sure that we as Black folks, that we don't fall for homophobia, that we don't fall for xenophobia, that we don't fall for sexism, because that's what they want us to do. That's what you call gaslighting. They want LGBT folks and Black folks to be at war. They want people to think, women are trying to take over. It's profitable to have these wars of ideology where nobody wins. So no matter how you feel, if you are conservative, whatever the case may be, having laws and policies in place, if you think it won't affect you, it will eventually affect you. And I was saying this yesterday, Keith, for the white LGBT folks who were ignoring critical race theory, who didn't think that would really affect them or would impact them. Well, now you have laws in place that are not happening not only in Florida, but other parts of the country that are affecting LGBT folks. And to Anita Bryant, for folks who don't remember, she was fighting for policy that would fire LGBT teachers, that would fire a teacher minding their business if they were somehow outed, to literally say, you can't work. You are not able to work because of your private life. And I'm very concerned that we're going to go back to those days.
Well, one of the parts of the Don't Say Gay bill that didn't get passed in the end was an outing provision that would have required schools and teachers to out LGBTQI students, which is an outrageous thing that would even come up for consideration. But this is a state of where our country is today, with a small segment of the population that is determined to fight on these issues. And I have to say, Clay, that I think that these wedge politics can be effective, but only in limited circumstances, because from my research, which I've been doing for the past 30 years or so, the Black community is politically progressive, but socially conservative. So on many of these social issues, they're likely to find a lot of Black people who support them. But when you ask the Black community, are you going to vote for these people as a party, when you consider everything else they've been doing to Black people, that's still not enough to get us to vote for them as a party. So I don't think it's an effective political strategy for the Republicans, but part of it isn't to get Black people to vote, is to suppress the Black vote.
That's right.
Make Black people who are socially conservative, who lean more on the conservative lens, to say, well, they're both the same. The parties are pretty much the same. Or I don't like the Democrats for this. I don't like the Republicans for this. I'm just not going to vote. And they know that if Black people don't vote, then Democrats don't win.